Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the old school. Good to be back after a little hiatus. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to everybody out there. We're very excited to be back, and tonight we are going to take on, well, it's a lot of information, so we're going to narrow it down a little bit, but we are going to do the most influential Philadelphia sports general managers. The good, the bad, the ugly. Basically, we're going to do best GMs, most influential. I mean, where do you even start with this list? I mean, my God, you could the Sixers alone have like 16 general managers. You know what I mean? So we're gonna take a walk down memory lane, have some good memories, some bad memories, and sit back and give us your opinions, and we're gonna get into it here. So. Without further ado, I got my regular cast here. I got Uncle Mark to my left,
Joe, good evening.
Cousin Roger to his left.
Cousin Joe.
How are you? Happy New Year, man.
Happy New Year's.
Yeah,
Happy
so
New Year to the audience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Happy
so-
New Year, everybody.
yeah, so much to get into here. I mean, first off, Philadelphia sports right now is doing very well, except for the team. Well, I can't even say that. The Flyers are actually playing pretty good. I got a Flyers jersey on right here, and they're playing some good hockey. But you got basketball teams playing well, baseball team. Hey, Dave Dombrowski, he's only been on the job for a couple years, but
He's going to be.
I was gonna say he may be at one of the top lists of these GMs in a few years.
Better
He's
believe
making
it.
some moves.
He has the potential to do that. Yeah.
He definitely does, and the
I
guy's
was a winner
the guy's won everywhere he's been.
everywhere he goes.
You know, He's-
Like Pat Gillick.
Yeah.
Exactly, and we'll be getting into Pat Gillick. So we are going to, as you see here with the graphic here, we're going to start off with the best GMs. Philadelphia has had a long sports history, as you all know. Each team has had their share of great GMs. So we're going to start off. We're going to start off with baseball. So I would say you guys would probably have to agree the best GM probably in Philly's history would be Paul Owens, correct? The Pope.
Yes.
Oh, yes, most definitely.
All right. So
Yeah, because he was around from 72 to 83, and he built those great 70s teams, the World Series team in 80, and even the 83 team that went to the World Series and lost to Baltimore in 5 games.
And in addition to general manager bringing up in 1983, he left the executive lounge and put himself back in the dugout.
Yeah.
As manager.
Yeah, to get these guys motivated. Yeah, because he had a lot of older guys on that club.
Yes, he did.
A lot of older guys. And they traded
Nicknamed the Wheeze Kids.
So, hey, Pat, how you doing? My man Patrick Bernard checking in. So Paul Owens, I mean, 48 years with the franchise. I mean, my God, that's some people don't even make 48 years. He had 48 years just with the Phillies.
Yeah.
Very, very impressive. He was the GM with the didn't back in the 70s they had it called the Phillies way when that was one of their best minor league. They called a lot of guys up from the minor leagues, correct?
Oh,
like what was it? Schmidt, Boa,
Boa, Schmidt,
Luzinski.
Mhm.
Boone, Ruthven, Larry Christensen. At one point, you have Martinez.
Willie
Willie
Martinez.
Martinez. and
Don't
then he was used in a trade later for Gary Maddox.
Gotcha.
Don't forget Dave Cash.
Oh, they brought Dave Cash in as a free agent.
Right.
Uh,
He also went out and got Pete. Back the biggest free agent signing at the time, they went out and got Pete Rose.
Yeah. They also
They
got
put him over the top.
they also brought Bate McBride in on those late 70s teams. He played right field, great right field. They traded for Maddox, Ed Luzinski. They brought in, they had several different guys before Pete Rose. They had Richie Hebner played first base,
Gotcha.
the hacker. They had Ted Sizemore played second base before they got Trio. They went and they made that trade for Manny Trio.
Yeah.
So I mean, this guy, and the 72 trade for Carlton, that was the franchise. He was the franchise.
Right.
And then, like I said, the rest of the staff, some of them were from the minors. You had Dick Ruthven, you had Larry Christensen, and then he brought in, and then some of his key bullpen guys in the 80s late 70s, 80s. He had he
Well,
brought
the Tugger, he brought the Tugger over, right?
He brought the Tugger over
twice.
twice.
Okay.
Yeah, and then he also had we had a guy we had a guy named Willie Hernandez, who the next GM, which was Giles, made the bonehead trade.
Yeah, my man Dave Yordle right here. He's bringing up what I was about to bring up too. The 1980. Hey Dave, thanks for checking in. He says Bob Walk, and that's a very interesting point, because you look at the minor league system in 1980. Bob Walk started Game 1 of the World Series, right? And you had Marty Bystrom.
Bystrom pitched in the series.
Yeah, so I mean, Paul Owens. So basically, Paul Owens, we would say, was probably the best GM in Phillies history. And I guess an honorable mention, because he was GM through two World Series appearances, one World Series championship. And
then all those great 70s, 76, 77, 78, where they've got to the NLCS. In 76, they lost to the Big Red Machine, which was no shame. And then they lost 77, 78 to the Dodgers, and they arguably could have won both those series. I mean,
if not for Mother Nature.
Yeah, 77 was the
and a bad call by the ump, because Davey Lopes was out first base.
Yeah, I was at that game.
Larry, they called that Black Friday, correct?
Was that
Black Friday?
Yeah, I was at that game. He was out at first, and then every game during the season, late in the innings when we had a lead, Danny Ozark would take Luzinski out of left, and he'd put Jerry Martin in. Jerry Martin's a great fielder, great arm.
Yeah.
And he leaves Luzinski in, and the
balls.
What,
did he just have a brain cramp?
Must have. And then the next thing you know, balls hit back to the wall, and you see Luzinski go to the wall. And I was there. I was just, I left that. I mean, it was amazing. People that walked out of there, it was just frightening.
The other thing about Paul Owens, why he, in our opinion, fits the bill for probably the best general manager for the Phillies. He was also, with his tenure with the team, a bridge from, to use an analogy, the old school, and he finished up right when there's a transition in baseball. What I mean by old school is he was the belly up to the bar, literally, type GM, and that's how deals were done.
Yeah.
They would meet at a hotel.
Yeah.
They'd go to the lounge. They'd get shit-faced, and they'd start playing fantasy baseball. I mean, that's how they got things done. But he had the Midas touch. Maybe he could hold his liquor a little better than some of the other GMs. I don't know.
Yeah.
But and then not just that, and then he also came in as a GM during free agency,
right,
in the early 70s,
right.
And that was that was a big year in baseball, and everything changed.
Yeah.
So I mean, this guy he had seen it all.
Well, isn't it ironic? Wasn't it Curt Flood that didn't want to come to the Phillies, and that was the impetus for free agency, correct?
He started the free agency.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So Paul Owens was the best GM in Phillies history. Honorable mention to Pat Gillick, because Pat Gillick took another one of our guys. Ed Wade will be part of our list later. But Pat Gillick came in and added to Ed Wade's guys, going in and getting the Brad Lidge, getting Dave Yordle said, don't forget about Ron Reed in the bullpen. Yeah.
Ron Reed.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was a great bullpen.
That was a great move as well.
McGraw, Ron Reed.
Exactly. So, but anyway, then you had Gillick came in. Gillick got a guy like Jason Worth. He gets Brad Lidge. He
got J.C. Romero,
Scott Air. So honorable mention to Pat Gillick too. Now, all right, so that's the best Phillies GM. Now let's move on to the Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia Eagles, we have a lot of guys we could get into. You mentioned Jim Murray with Coach Vermeil. Possibly Harry Gamble could be on there. But in my opinion, modern day guy right now, Howie Roseman is the best GM of the Philadelphia Eagles have ever had. I mean, first off, the only GM that's been part of a Super Bowl winner. Right now, they're 14-3, number one seed in the NFC, young roster. First off, actually, I read something where the Eagles are the only team in NFL history in a 5-year span to have different, 2 different coaches and 2 different quarterbacks and be like the number 1 seed or something like that. I think I could be wrong, but I read something like that. But it's what he's done is just remarkable. And he's had his failures. I mean, all I have to do is mention Justin Jefferson, and people are out with pitchforks, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
Jalen Rieger,
Justin Jefferson,
Whiteside,
pitchforks,
Whiteside, Whiteside.
Maybe signing Carson Wentz to that deal, but to his credit, for most of his mistakes he's made, he's found a way to clean them up. And the Eagles, by most accounts right now, they're one of, if not the most talented roster in the National Football League.
On both sides,
On both sides of the ball.
defense, offense.
We had 6 guys named to the. They named 6 guys to the
Pro Bowl.
all pro team.
Yeah.
2 first teamers were Kelsey and Lane Johnson, and then the other 4 were Hurts, AJ Brown.
Yeah.
The guy they picked up from the Giants, the cornerback,
Bradbury.
and then the 6th guy.
Slay.
No.
Landon, did you say Landon Dickerson?
No. There were 6 of them.
Well,
It'll come.
if it comes to you, regardless.
Yeah.
The guy's doing a great job. He's probably the best GM in Eagles history.
Oh, the kid that played at Temple.
Hassan Reddick.
Reddick.
Well,
That's great position.
okay. So look at his moves. Look at just this offseason. This was a 9-8 football team last year, and by most accounts, they got to the playoffs because they had an easy schedule. And here, hang on, I got a comment here. My man Paul Spencer, he said Howie Roseman, he has had some bad drafts, Rager, but he's done it right lately, hands down. Hate to say it, but clearly I call him Mr. Fleece. Yeah, that's true. My man Paul is a Cowboys fan. He you know Paul. He does the Cowboys show on the Out of Box Network. Other GMs probably won't even want to answer the phone when he calls, because you look at the Eagles' future. I mean, they got the number 1 record, and they have the 10th pick in the draft. And then look and look at his offseason. Like I was getting into, a 9-8 team got to the playoffs mostly for an easy record. Goes out and adds, what's his face? Hassan Reddick, Pro Bowler.
Kazir White.
Bradbury, Pro
Bowler.
What's his face? CJ Gardner Johnson, tied for the league in interceptions. Even meanwhile, he missed like 4 games.
Exactly.
I mean, this guy. A couple years ago, Slay for a 3rd and a 5th. Signs Javon Hargrave as a free agent. Everybody shits all over Howie Roseman's drafts, and rightfully so. But they always forget to look at the 2017 draft was a disaster, but they always forget to look at the 2018 draft. 2018 draft, he gets Dallas Goedert, right?
Right.
Josh Sweat. He gets Avonte Maddox, one of the best slot corners in the league. He gets Jordan Mailata in the 7th round. Yes, okay, I know somebody, a Howie Roseman critic could say it was a lottery pick. I don't care. You still get credit for it. He's got a starting left tackle in the 7th round. So how many starters is that? That's what? Dallas Goedert 1, Avonte Maddox 2, Jordan Mailata 3, and Josh Sweat 4. 4 starters in the draft.
And Jalen Hurts.
Well, that's the other one. I bring this.
And most of these guys are Pro Bowl guys. Sweat's a Pro Bowler. Mailata should be a Pro Bowler. And the other names you mentioned.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And then even other avenues, like you said, like we say Justin Jefferson, terrible miss. But the 2nd round, this guy has the cojones to pick Jalen Hurts when he has a franchise quarterback who they already re-upped to a long contract.
$100 and some million.
Yeah. Jalen Hurts may go, if Jalen Hurts continues his progression, he may go down as the best pick he's ever had. And it comes after possibly his worst.
And if he hadn't gotten hurt and missed 3 games, did he miss? Or 2?
Who Hurts?
Yeah.
2 games.
2 games. He was almost a shoo-in for MVP.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. that's
Missing
gonna
those
hurt
two
him now.
games and then having not so good a game
last week.
may have hurt his chances for that. But
So so anyway, we could do a show on its own just on Howie Roseman, but let's for the purpose of time, I want to get into all these guys, so we'll move on here. Got my man Mike Lauro. He says, "Sup guys, awesome topic. Love the old school shows. I learn every time I watch." Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
All right, so I want to get into next the Philadelphia Flyers. Okay, best GM in Philadelphia Flyers history, and all long-suffering Flyers fans out there will probably know this because they haven't won a Stanley Cup since, well, let's see, it's 2023, 1975.
50 years.
Yeah, all right. So almost 50 years, actually about 48 years. So as long as Paul Owens was with the Phillies is how long the Flyers have gone without tasting the cup. Okay, but any long-term Flyers fan out there would probably have to say the greatest general manager in Philadelphia Flyers history was Keith Allen. So Keith Allen was general manager.
Without a doubt.
Keith Allen was general manager of the Flyers 1969 and 1983. He was also the very first coach of the franchise's history too. Basically, Allen was the architect of the Broad Street Bullies. I mean, he added guys like Rick McLeish. Bobby Clark was actually, I didn't know this because I thought Keith Allen added Bobby Clark, but Bobby Clark was actually added by the first GM, who was Bud Poyle. Bud Poyle actually did a pretty good job too. He had the balls to take Bobby Clark as a diabetic.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? But Keith Allen sat here and he got guys like Barry Ashby, Rick McLeish, Ross Lawnsbury, Andre Dupont, Reggie Leach.
Yeah, you traded Bill Flett for Reggie Leach.
Yeah.
You also had Bill Flett at one time.
Yeah. Now he did. People gave him the nickname because of his great trades as Keith the Thief. So Keith Allen was the general manager here.
What you had back then, and Raj remembers this too, because back in the 70s and the early 80s, that Flyers organization, you had Mr. Snyder as the owner, and that's how everybody referred to him as Mr. Snyder.
Not me. I call him Ed.
Ed, there you go. Well, anyway, Ed Snyder's the owner. You had Keith Allen, and then you had Shiro. You had three guys that were all on the same page, and they knew what they wanted to do, and they designed the game, and they changed the game. They revolutionized the game. And it was more exciting then, in my view, than it is today. But that's just me, because I grew up in that era. I remember those teams.
Well, they were a novelty.
Oh, yeah.
And they won.
Yeah.
So hence you liking it. If they could have been a novelty and didn't win, and you'd probably say they sucked.
And then what happened was people started. Then a lot of teams started copying. Everybody that wins, everybody wants to copycat the winner.
Yeah. Well, each team wound up having a goon. I mean, didn't what's his face? Dave Schultz. Didn't he have he had guys on the Rangers who used to fight and the Bruins. I mean,
Keith O'Reilly.
O'Reilly and on Boston, Wayne Cashman.
Yeah,
Wayne Cashman.
He was a winger, and they say that he was so good with his stick he could flick a guy's eye out of his head, and so he used to fight Cashman, and he used to fight Terry O'Reilly on Boston.
Terry O'Reilly, right?
And Montreal had a guy by the name of John Van Boxmeer, who was a big dude, and he knocked him out on a Sunday game on years ago when the Flyers were so popular. They put him on NBC television in the 70s, and this was a regular season game, and he literally knocked them out. The guy was just laying there cold.
Yeah.
And all these.
How about when the Red Army team came here? Flyers were the only team to beat them in North America. I mean they were intimidated, and and that was the culture that Keith Allen.
Yeah. In fact, they went back into the one of the what had happened was the Red Army team was skating before the game, and the Flyers were skating, and one of the Red Army guys, his ankle accidentally crossed the red line,
Mhm.
and Clark took a stick and whacked it. And so the next thing you know, the Red Army Army team got all upset, and the coach took them into the locker room and they said, "We're not playing." And then they went down to them and they said, "Hey, look, you don't play, you're not getting paid."
Yeah, the next thing you know, they changed their tune.
It's the exact thing there. They changed their tune, and then we just wailed on them.
Yeah. So, and the other thing that's interesting about Keith Allen too, you know, it's easy to point to the Broad Street Bullies, you know, but he also set them because the Flyers were extremely successful all the way through the 80s. I mean, you know, they had those finals. I started watching hockey 86, 87, and that was the year they lost to Edmonton in Game 7. But some of those guys were from Keith Allen. Like, for instance, he drafted Brian Propp. He drafted Ron Hextall. He drafted Ron Sutter. Drafted Pelle Lindbergh. Obviously, you know, tragedy would happen to Pelle Lindbergh. Pelle Lindbergh probably would have been one of the all-time great
Oh,
goalies.
he was the heir apparent. He was going to be the next Bernie.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know,
we won the cup in 74.
75.
When we beat Boston, 75, we beat Buffalo. We went like 6 or 7 games against the Canadiens, and Bernie was hurt. And we had
An eye injury.
yeah, he had an eye injury. Otherwise, we probably would have won that cup. In 80, we lost to the Islanders.
And that was the controversial
And that
Bobby
was
Nystrom being offside.
That was an offsides. Yeah, that was a bad call we lost on that game.
Yeah, I forget who the hell was the ref? I used to know that by heart.
Everybody
Yeah.
in Philadelphia knew.
It wasn't Terry McCreary or
No.
Bill McCreary or
I don't remember the name.
I can't remember.
I remember.
if anybody out there remembers
think
that
of it.
ref, because I used to know it by heart. Now I can't remember the
Yeah, they got
ref.
jobbed on that one.
Leon Stickle, was it?
Could have been.
You're warm. Yeah.
Okay, but
Leon
anyway,
Stickle.
yeah, it could have been. I could be wrong. If anybody out there watching remembers. So anyway, so Keith Allen, like I said, 4 finals appearances, 2 cups, the best GM in Flyers history, I think, bar none.
Exactly.
And I would give honorable mention, like I said, to Bud Poyle, because he drafted Dave Schultz, he drafted Bobby Clark, and he added guys. His first draft brought in guys like Bernie Parent, Joe Watson, and Ed Van Emp. So he set Keith Allen up with a nice little core, and then Keith Allen came in and knocked it out of the park.
Doug Favell.
What's that?
Doug Favell.
Yeah.
Doug Favell, yes. So now we move on. Best GM in the Philadelphia 76ers history. And, you know, in doing research about this guy, I knew a lot about this. I knew a lot about Pat Williams, but Pat Williams was a very interesting character, Pat Williams. I mean, and he had, not only did he have success in Philadelphia, but then he went to the expansion Orlando Magic, and he did a great job with the Orlando Magic.
Built that team so they got to the championship game.
Right, you know,
he Shaq and Anthony Hardaway.
Right.
Well,
Right.
he had carte blanche. He didn't have Harold Katz as an owner.
Yeah, that's what screwed him up
And
in the end when Katz took over.
that was absolutely a handicap for him
But yeah,
because
So
nobody knew more than Katz.
that's why when you look at like Keith Allen and Ed Snyder, the success that the team had all those years is because that they worked together like this. But when you had Pat Williams and you had then you had
Jack and Dan.
you had Pat Williams and then the
Howard
owner
Katz.
Oh,
Katz, and it was like this because Katz thought he knew basketball.
Katz would mess up a wet dream.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously. But all right. So Pat Williams came in 1974, 1986. Now this was a few years after the 9 and 73 season. So, you know,
He came in the year after.
yeah, go under the days of, you know, the great Wilt Chamberlain and
Billy Cunningham.
Billy Cunningham
Hal
and all them guys, Hal Greer. So
Chuck
during
Walker.
Pat Williams' helm, the 76ers compiled a 640 and 344 regular season record. Franchise appeared in 4 NBA Finals and won the title in 1983. When Williams came in, he immediately started making moves to improve the club. In 1975, he acquired center Caldwell Jones as a free agent. He also added Darryl Dawkins with the 5th pick of the draft, Chocolate Thunder.
Yeah.
He also selected World B. Free in the 2nd round. That was a good find.
can't believe it.
George McGinnis and Joe Bryant were also acquired as free agents. 1976, Henry Bibby was acquired from the New Orleans Jazz, And of course, Dr. J was acquired from the I guess back then the New York Nets.
New York
it says.
Nets.
Up in Long Island, yeah.
Williams also dealt Mel Blount to the. This is the thing that fascinates me about Pat Williams. Pat Williams was like Sam Hinkie on steroids, except Pat Williams actually could draft well. Like, you know, it's like Sam Hinkie, who we'll get into later, collected assets. Sam Hinkie would make a trade for like a draft pick like 4 years down the road. Well, Pat Williams did that, and it was brilliant because Pat Williams right here, I have in 1976, he deals Mel Bennett to the Pacers for a 1980 first-round pick, which they used for the Boston Strangler, Andrew Toney. Now, one of the reasons the Sixers had such a long-standing, because you know how the NBA, when you're good, the NBA draft, you need a top pick most of the time. So the Sixers were good for all those years. You couldn't have a top pick. Well, Pat Williams made deals to get them
To get,
top picks.
and not only top picks, but what you would consider lottery picks from teams like the Cavaliers, who were dreadful forever.
Right.
The San Diego
Clippers.
the San Diego Clippers back then, because we traded Joe Bryant and got a #1 pick, and that turned out to be
Right. I was going to say, yeah, that's exactly what
that
I'm
was
getting.
what that turned out to be Barkley.
I believe so. Yeah, because right here, so basically, he gets Andrew Toney. Then he deals Fred Carter, the Mad Dog Carter, to the Bucks for a 1977 second-round pick and a 78 second-rounder that was used on Maurice Cheeks. So this guy acquires his starting backcourt for the 1983 team. Hall of Famer Maurice Cheeks. Is he still the NBA all-time steal leader? I know he was at one point.
Yeah.
I don't know if he still is. Records are made to be broken. It could have been broken, but I know Mo Cheeks was one of the all-time greatest defensive point guards in basketball history. Andrew Toney would have been a Hall of Famer had he not hurt his foot. So that's two possible Hall of Fame players that Pat Williams gets for looking towards the future, right? So I'm right here, October 1979, Joe Bryant was traded to the Clippers for a 1986 first-round pick, which turned out to be Brad
Turned
Daugherty.
out to be Daugherty. Yeah, Bryant went in for Daugherty.
Yeah, I'm going over some of his moves. September 1982, obviously his most impactful move was getting Moses Malone from the Houston Rockets for Caldwell Jones and a 1983 first-round pick. You know, as you all know out there, the last time the Sixers have won a championship was 1983. Moses came in here, won the MVP award, and completed as you guys have told me many times, the We Owe You One campaigns from the 77 loss to Portland.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you know, I didn't realize this, but Pat Williams actually, he green-lighted that. When they had the campaign, Pat Williams was one of the guys that green-lighted that campaign. And you think about it, if you're a team, that tells you that he's a character. You know what I mean?
Well, back then when they had the finals, when the finals started, I remember it was on ABC News, World News Tonight, and it was just before the first game, and there was a big time TV sports reporter. He's dead now. He died years ago. His name was Dick Schaap, and he was at the Sixers practice, and he mentioned in the intro about the Sixers was probably the greatest team of talent ever assembled in the history of basketball. I mean, that's how deep this team was. They had everything. You stop and look at game 6 at Portland. Who was on the floor? You had Joe Bryant was on the floor.
Yeah.
You had McGinnis and Dr. J,
Doug Collins,
and
Caldwell.
Yeah, World B. Free. World B. Free was a
World
good
B.
player
Free.
back then.
I mean, Bryant played, like I said, and you look at the end of the game, and Bryant was on the floor with those guys. McGinnis makes that shot.
They were on another barometer for how interesting a team they were and how popular a team they were. They were on almost every Sunday on CBS
Yeah, with Brent Musburger.
And that
And Russell used to do the color.
for basketball, that was the equivalent back then of like Monday Night Football.
Exactly.
And just to tell you some of the other moves he made, because the most impactful was Moses, because that got him over the top. How about this for a move though? 1978, he trades George McGinnis along with the
Bobby
78
Jones.
first round pick, gets Bobby Jones.
That was Billy Cunningham's doings.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Definitely.
Billy Cunningham. And then the trade you mentioned, October of 78, Williams traded guard Will B. Free to the Clippers for 1984 first
That's
rounder,
right.
which was
That's
used for
Barkley.
Barkley.
Oh, that's boring.
So like I was saying, Pat Williams always had a now think about that. 1978, he has his eyes to the future. A 1984 first round pick. That is how Pat Williams should write a book on how to build a successful NBA franchise.
Boy, it's interesting because if you stop and think about it, if any of you have ever gone to business school, I have an MBA, Master's in Business Administration, and I got my MBA in the 80s. And the one thing that you always learn about is Japanese companies and the Korean companies. They would sit there and when they entered the U.S. marketplace with Toyotas and Nissans, and they knew that they weren't gonna make money for maybe 8-10 years or whatever. But Hyundai is the same thing. They knew they came into the U.S. market in the late 80s. Horrible automobile. Look at it today. It's one of the top selling automobiles in this country. The Asians had a long view. They looked to the long term. And contrast that to American business, which is like, what are we doing this quarter? And that's all. Pat Williams is like, to make an analogy, Pat Williams was almost like a Japanese CEO.
Yeah.
He had that unique vision that he could sit there and say, okay, well, this is the long view. He had a command of the short view. He always had a command of what was going on at present, but he always had a vision, a future vision, which is a sign of a great leader.
Well,
he also had unbelievable assistant GM, Jack McMahon.
Jack McMahon.
Yeah, and must have had great scouts because
Yeah.
to find a guy like Mo Cheeks in the second round, that's
Andrew
great
Toney.
scouting. Will B. Free was a second round pick.
I think Jack McMahon did a lot of the scouting too back then.
Oh yeah,
Jack McMahon was Chuck Daly.
Chuck Daly.
They had Chuck Daly, who used to coach at Penn, and he was an assistant with Billy Cunningham, and he did a lot of the scouting. And then ultimately, Chuck Daly goes to Detroit. You know what happens there? He's got the bad boys, and he builds that team, and they become champions. So I mean, we had
I was going to say a la Larry Brown. He
Yeah.
did the same thing. Left us, went to Detroit.
we had this pedigree in this city, and the irony of the whole thing is, when Katz was the guy that when he bought the team, he's the guy that brought Malone here, and they won the championship because of that. But then anything that Katz did after that was just so detrimental to the franchise.
Well, actually, that it's funny you mentioned that because under Pat Williams, the team consistently won. I mean, they even won like 50, I think over 50, I think close to 58 games in 1984.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they only won, that as good as that 83 team was, they had to compete with the Celtics and Larry Bird. So they only won one championship, but they were consistently there every year. So I'm wondering, because Williams left in 1986, and I'm wondering if this is one of the reasons he left, because I think Katz was one of the reasons they made his run of great trades ran out. And I think Katz, I blame this on Harold Katz more than I blame this on Pat Williams. The Sixers had the number one pick in the draft, Brad Daugherty. They traded him for a guy named Roy Hinson of the Cavaliers. They thought that he could guard Kevin McHale, and he couldn't guard.
Katz did.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. So that's why I blame.
That wasn't Pat Williams.
And I think that's why Williams left, because he says, "Hey, I'm out of here. You're tying my hands."
Right.
Yeah. The same day, they traded Moses Malone, Terry Catledge, 2 first-round picks to the Washington Bullets for center Jeff Ruland and Cliff Robinson. Ruland would only go on to play 5 games. Now, the thinking behind the trade was you had a young Charles Barkley, who was now the future of the franchise. Malone was coming off an eye injury. His numbers were going down a little bit, and Malone was kind of slowing up the team, where the team wanted to have Ruland throw fast break passes to Barkley. And the thinking was solid, but it turned out to be a disaster. And the team literally went from, despite having Charles Barkley, one of the best young players in the game, team went from up here to like mediocrity immediately.
Yeah,
And I have a story about that. It's interesting. This is true. When I worked, one of the jobs I did in my career, when I was doing my career, I was an international trade specialist. I worked for a World Trade Center. And one of my friends, her name was Jean Marie Marchetto, and her husband was Dr. Paul Marchetto, who became the Eagles team doctor and the Flyers doctor. But when he first started out, he was the Sixers team doctor. And he evaluated Jeff Ruland's knee.
Mhm.
He personally evaluated. He said, whatever you do not trade for this guy. He said, he's not going to hold up. And Katz made the deal anyway. And then so Paul Marchetto, he quit.
Well, the deal got out.
Yeah.
And I think they were almost, Katz felt probably cornered.
Yeah.
Because that was another trade that when you looked at it, if Ruland was healthy,
Oh, that would have been a great
It
trade.
would have been a great trade.
Malone led the league in minutes for like the previous 5 years. He was
Yeah, a lot of mileage.
he was an older 32-ish age, 33 maybe.
Yeah, Ruland was 28 at the time.
Ruland was 6-7 years
So
younger.
if he was healthy, that
He was
would
a
have worked out.
Terrific basketball player.
Oh, great.
Rebounding,
Great passer.
Outlet-
Great outlet passer.
outlet pass like Willis Reed had.
Yeah.
Same type of game. Unfortunately, he didn't listen to the doctor.
Yeah.
And or the doctors. And
And I know Paul Marchetto, and he told me that at a dinner one night. We were having discussions, and he told me about that. He said
Mhm.
that's why, and he was talking about the reason, some of these owners, they have so much influence. And another thing he told me, this is another thing, this was when he was the Eagles team doctor years later. The Eagles one year, you may remember, they had a draft, one of their draft choices. They picked a guy on the 5th round. He turned out to be a bust. He was a wide receiver, punt returner from Colorado named Jeffrey Bloom.
Oh yeah, I
He
remember
was a
him.
skier.
Yeah.
And Paul told me at dinner, he said the reason that he was selected was because Lurie's wife at the time thought he was cute.
Ah,
And so that was the lobbying. That's how that got done. I mean, it's, some of these owners do push the envelope, and they speak when they shouldn't. And Katz, nobody was worse than Katz. But
pillow
Yeah.
talk.
yeah, exactly. Pillow talk. Good point, Raj.
yeah. So you know what? We'll get into the worst GMs a little later. I want to get into, because it's easy to name the best ones. I want to get into some unsung GMs, and so I got one. The first guy that comes to mind to me is the baseball guy, Ed Wade.
Yeah.
Unsung GM. I mean, Ed Wade. I remember the Phillies had so many near misses with the Bobby Abreu teams and going out and getting Jim Thome. But Ed Wade built this farm system. I mean, Ed Wade added Jimmy Rollins. He added Ryan Howard. He added Chase Utley.
Here you go.
He added Cole. Oh, go ahead.
These
Go ahead.
are Ed Wade's drafts. 1998. Pat Burrell, Ryan Madsen, and Nick Punto. They made the club, and Nick Punto was used later in a trade. The next year, 99, it was Brett Myers and Marlon Byrd. In 2000, it was Chase Utley, and then Taylor Buchholz, who made the team, and then he was ultimately traded. Then in 01, it was Gavin Floyd and Ryan Howard.
Mhm.
In 02, it was Cole Hamels. In 03, it was Kyle Kenrick and Michael Bourne. In 04, it was Shane Victorino, won the Rule 5 from the Dodgers. J.A. Happ and Lou Marston. And Marston was ultimately traded for somebody. In 05, it was Vance Worley. So, I mean, he built a nice farm system, and a lot of those guys were
On the 08 team.
on the 08 team.
And Michael Bourne. Without Michael Bourne, you don't have Brad Lidge, and without Brad Lidge, you don't have a World Series. So, Ed Wade, for all his faults, and I know he used to drive a lot of fans out there crazy, because every trade deadline, people would be clamoring to add somebody. Meanwhile, he'd go out and get like Turk Wendell, and it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But to his credit, and let's be honest too, he could have saved his job and traded a Chase Utley or especially Ryan Howard. The pressure to trade Ryan Howard was probably great on him because he had Jim Thome here.
Exactly.
So I know back like 04, 05, when they're going for the playoffs, he was, to save his own ass, he could have traded one of those guys. And to his credit, he didn't. It ultimately cost him his job. But I gotta think Philly's ownership and anybody that knows baseball thinks extremely highly of him for what he did, because they do not win the World Series without those guys.
Well, kudos to Pat Gillett, because he stepped up, no pun intended, he stepped to the plate after the Phillies won in 08, and he gave Ed Wade
He did, yes.
unbelievable amount of credit.
Yeah.
That, goes to show you what type of guy Pat Gillett was.
Yeah.
Not every GM would acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Want to talk about what you were telling me earlier about Ed Wade and the press, because I didn't know a lot about that.
Yeah, and he had a history, Ed Wade, with all the pluses that we're looking at retrospectively.
You're talking about the beat writers and everything.
Right. He would make a move at the trade deadline, and invariably it was almost always like another middle reliever. Where's the impact? Everybody wanted, the Phillies stunk, and it built up to where there was a lot of animosity between him and the Philadelphia press, and it was really colorful. It turned into colorful meetings.
I know Howard Eskin never liked Ed Wade. I remember that vividly.
And if you guys remember, before Thome came in 02, they were under pressure to keep the payroll down because they knew they were going to the new stadium, and that's why they brought Thome in.
Mm-hmm.
Thome was going to be the guy that was help sell tickets to the new stadium. So,
Ed Wade, to some degree, if you think about it, was not altogether that different from Howie Roseman.
Yeah.
Similar age in the position,
Mm-hmm.
but a sharp enough guy. He is evidenced by winning the 08 and the success they had after
he set the table with a lot of that.
and then he went to Houston and rebuilt that
He did.
organization, because they were dreck for forever.
Yeah, Houston was a bad club for a long time. Then Wade came in and he set the table, and he put the building blocks in, and then later they started winning championships.
I think he probably has a bit of an abrasive personality, and he doesn't take shit.
Well, you know what's funny in the movie, Ed Wade's name is in the movie Moneyball. Ed Wade's name. He's not actually in the movie, but one of the scenes is Billy Beane calls up and says, "Oh, call Ed Wade up in Philly, good guy." And then you hear somebody impersonate Ed Wade, and they make the trade where the Phillies got Jeremy Giambi.
Yeah.
So one thing about Philadelphia is
John Mayberry for Jeremy Giambi.
no, something like that. Yeah,
That's what it was.
yeah, but
Yeah, I have it right here.
yeah, so John Mabry, I think it was.
John Mabry.
You always get the wrong brother.
M-A-B-R-Y.
Remember we got Dom. I was way too young for this, but I remember the Phillies had Dom DiMaggio and not Joe DiMaggio, right? Something like that.
And they had Brett.
We had
Ken Brett.
Ken Brett.
We had Ken Brett as was the George Brett.
Yeah, so you have, all right, so Ed Wade's a very young son. Now, I think you have at least one, maybe two Eagles GMs, correct?
Yeah, I think, and I think these two guys are very unsung, and a lot of people don't really even talk about them, or if they do, they're cast in a very negative light. I think that not as much the first guy, but the second guy. I'll do the first guy. The first guy was Jim Murray. He was the GM from 73 to 84, and he's the guy that helped build the championship teams
The Vermeil.
for Coach Vermeil, like for the playoff teams and the Super Bowl team. Like, here's his draft choices, for example. He had in 73, he had All Pro first team Charlie Young. He had Guy Morris, the center. Jerry Sizemore was the right tackle. Randy Logan, safety, and then the next year was Frank LeMaster, and Keith Trefley was the tight end on that team. And the 76, it was Carl Hairston, the defensive end. In 77, he picked Wilbert Montgomery on the 7th round. Charlie Johnson, the nose tackle. In 78, he had Reggie Wilkes, Dennis Harrison, and Billy Canfield, who was a running back. He was a great pass receiver.
He was Dick Vermeil's nephew, I remember.
Yeah. 79, it was Jerry Robinson, first round pick. P.D. Perot, guard.
Jerry Robinson.
The last linebacker that was ever selected in the first round by the Eagles. Tony Franklin and Max Roniger, the kicker and the punter of the 80 team. Roynell Young was the first round.
Yeah.
80. 81, he had Ray Ellis, and I picked a guy named Leonard Mitchell, who didn't really turn out to be as great as they thought he was going to be. 82 was Mike Quick. 83 was Wes Hopkins. And then 84, he had a kicker named Paul McFadden and a wide receiver who didn't really turn out as well as we thought he would. That was Kenny Jackson.
Yeah.
And maybe that was because he was playing most of his career with Randall.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Him and Ray. And what's ironic because Kenny Jackson and Randall, I remember being a kid. I think they were really good friends. I think that's one of the reasons Kenny Jackson hung on as long as he did because he was buddies with Randall.
I mean, you look at all the years that Randall. I mean, when Randall was here, the number one receiver was always Keith Jackson.
Yeah.
Tight end, yeah.
Keith Jackson was the number one receiver. Randall had was the leading rusher, and Keith Jackson was always the leading receiver.
Yeah, Byers was up there too. He used to throw
Byers
Swing passes and
And then who's your other unsung guy?
And then some of the trades he made, some of the guys he picked up either free agency or trades. In 74 he got Berge. Well, 73 he traded for Gabriel. He traded Harold Jackson. We talked about the wide receivers. Harold Jackson in the 1970s he had more catches, more yards, and more touchdowns than any wide receiver in football. And that's including Biletnikoff and Lynn Swann and all those guys. And he's the only one that we came up with that wasn't in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And more than Carmichael, more than all those.
You said
guys.
A lot of that might have been personality because he was one of the first diva receivers back in the 70s, correct?
Yeah, exactly. We got Gabriel in 73. He was, they called him the Messiah, and he had a great season that year. 74, we got Berge. We gave up a lot of draft choices for him. 77, we got Jaworski and Herm Edwards. In 78, he got Woody Peoples that we used to play for the 49ers. He was a starting guard on the 80 team, and Ken Clark was a nose tackle. He was in the rotation. Then in 79, he brought in Spagnola, who was the tight end. On that team, Leroy Harris was the starting fullback. Claude Humphreys he got from Atlanta, who was Pro Bowl pass rushing defensive end, Hall of Famer. And they brought in Bernard Wilson, who was the starter on that team.
Yeah.
So I mean, Jim Murray brought in, he had Mike McCormick as the coach till Coach Vermeil came in 76. He was there till 82 and he got burned out. Then Campbell took over 83 till 85 till Buddy came. And then in 85, another unsung GM, who I think was a real unsung GM, was Harry Gamble. He was there from 85 to 95. His win-loss record was 96, 78, and 1. He had 6 seasons with 10 or more wins. He had 3 coaches. He had Buddy for 5 years. He had Rich Kotite for 91 through 94, and then Ray Rhodes. And they had 7 playoff appearances. You had the Fog Ball. They lost.
Right.
They lost the wild card game to the Rams the next year. They lost the wild card game to Washington, and that's all on Buddy.
Mm-hmm.
92, they beat the Saints, but they lost to the Cowboys in the divisional round. They got blown out. And then in 95, they beat Detroit with Ray Rhodes' team. That was a blowout,
Yeah.
and then they lost to Dallas. But I mean, you stop and think, here's some of the guys that he drafted. I mean, he had a couple busts. 85, the first pick of the draft, the team's first round pick was a guy named Kevin Allen. That's the guy he wound up raping a girl in Margate Beach, and he went to prison for years. But he also picked Randall.
Mm-hmm.
The next year, he had Byers and Tony, Matt Darwin, who was a starter, Seth, and Clyde Simmons. The next year was Jerome Brown and Byron Evans, David Alexander, who was starting center, Chris Carter.
Yeah.
The next year in 88 was Keith Jackson, Eric Allen,
Yeah,
Both, Eric Allen's been nominated for the Hall of Fame.
yeah,
And
I was gonna say the best one of all, probably too. He got Reggie White in the supplemental draft
Got
in
some-
'85 too.
Reggie Winter, yeah, exactly. Got in '90, he had Ben. Then he had Heath Sherman in '89. He had Ben Smith, Arkansas Fred, and Calvin Williams in '90. '91, he had Willie T and Andy Harmon. '92 was Mark the Midget McMullen. In '94, he had Bernard Williams, who was all rookie offensive tackle, but he liked smoking dope too much. And then he had Charlie Garner. And then the last year, he picked Mamula on the first round, which was his mistake. But he had Bobby Taylor, who turned out to be a great player. And he also had some really great free agent signings, like Joe just mentioned. Reggie White, Tubby Hogue, Mike Pitts, Mike Golick, Ron Heller, Jimmy McMahon, Herschel Walker, William Fuller, Mark Bavaro, Romanowski, and Mike Zordich, and he also brought in Ricky Waters and Rodney Peete.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was very active. That's why this team won all those years. I was thinking about this the other day when I was putting this together. And I was curious if anybody out there that's listening, if they want to answer, or I'd like to get your guys' opinion. Had Jimmy McMahon been able to stay healthy, you think he could have been a Hall of Fame quarterback?
I don't know. Oh, you know what? I'm not. No, only because he wouldn't have had the numbers. Because every team he played for, he was more. I think he had the talent. If he was in the right offense, the right system, I think he could have been. But he was on ball control type teams where he was more of a game manager. But I think he had the talent.
Was when he came out of BYU. I mean, he had every passing record there.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, the guy was just lights out quarterback.
Well, I have one. Take the Hall of Fame out of it. Everybody points to 1991, Randall being hurt, and that's why we didn't win the Super Bowl. And I agree.
Wow.
I think if Jim McMahon was healthy the whole year, I think we would have won the Super Bowl with that defense in 1991.
Terrific year.
Oh yeah, we had that was the year we had Brad Gable,
Pat Ryan.
Oh God, they had like 5 different quarterbacks that year. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. And I have a.
So I mean, there's a couple unsung GMs I think the Eagles had, and I think they did a good job. And another thing about Jim Murray, he's the guy that founded the Ronald McDonald House down at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia.
That's a great thing.
That's a great thing. So I mean, these are two guys, and Harry Gamble coached at Penn. He played college ball in Jersey when he was going in college, and then he coached at Penn. And so I mean, this is a guy that. I mean, you heard his draft. You heard me talk about his draft choices and his free agent signings, and his record of 10 years was.
And he never gets credit because when you talked about a lot of them, everybody just goes Buddy Ryan. But Harry Gamble was a big part of Buddy Ryan's success.
Exactly.
Having that much success working for
Raymond,
a D-bag like Raymond,
Mm-hmm.
that was not easy.
And when I was doing research on Harry Gamble, he said he had been quoted in this book that I was reading. He said that he always had to go to war with Brayman to save Buddy's job because Brayman just hated him. I mean, it was always not just even about the playoff losses. It was just, because Buddy would always be talking, he'd always be saying something negative about the guy in France,
Yeah. So I have an unsung general manager with the Sixers because we touched off Pat Williams, the end of Pat Williams' tenure, and I basically said how they made the 2 disastrous trades. So the Sixers had a GM by the name of John Nash from 1986 to 1990. The last time the Sixers had won one of the last times the Sixers won the division, other than 2001, was 1990, and John Nash played a big role in that. So Nash comes in, tough situation, comes off the Moses Malone and the Brad Daugherty trade. John Nash first thing he did in 1988, he trades Roy Hinson and an 89 second rounder to the Nets for Ben Coleman and Mike Jaminski. Mike Jaminski was known as the G-Man, and he was a big part of that Barkley and Mahorn thump and bump team. All right. Then on draft night, he trades the third pick, which was Charles Smith, to the Clippers for guard Hersey Hawkins and an '89 first rounder who became Kenny Payne. Kenny Payne wasn't that good.
No.
But one of his best moves, October of '88, he traded a guy by the name of Everett Stevens to the Indiana Pacers for Ron Anderson. Ron Anderson would go on to be a very effective sixth man on that team.
You could use him now.
Right.
Use him big time.
His best trade was probably in 1989. He traded the Hall of Famer Mo Cheeks to the Spurs for Johnny Dawkins. Now, at the time, many fans didn't like that move because Mo Cheeks was beloved in this town. But Johnny Dawkins and Hersey Hawkins formed a nice tandem, which allowed the thump and bump Sixers to win the East and win 53 games in the '89-90 season.
Yeah, they were just up against Detroit,
they just weren't good enough.
Chicago. They just weren't deep enough. I mean, when they were bringing off, that team, they didn't have, they had Ron Anderson coming off the bench, who was a good ball player, but they didn't have much. They had one guy he was like a backup.
Bob Thornton.
Bob Thornton.
Yeah,
He was a big lumbering.
I think they got him from the Knicks.
Yeah, big lumbering guy. He wasn't quick. He didn't. He was just a journeyman.
The stiff.
Yeah, he was a stiff.
He would just go in there and he'd go up there, bang, use some fouls, and the other move he made for that team was he went out and got Rick Mahorn. He traded a 1990 first round pick plus 91 and 92 second round picks. Added Rick Mahorn from the Minnesota Timberwolves. He was selected in the expansion draft. He was on the Bad Boy Pistons. Rick Mahorn came in here and formed with Barkley the thump and bump tandem, which gave us a couple successful years. So John Nash is a guy, when you think of Sixers GMs, nobody really thinks of him.
No, nobody thinks of him.
But in doing this list for Unsung, he came into a horrible situation and he made some nice moves to at least give Barkley a chance to have a competitive team.
And also had to bang heads with
Harold Katz.
Up against Harold Katz, yeah.
So for Flyers Unsung GM, the only one I could think of would be Russ Farwell, and that would just strictly be just because the team sucked under Russ Farwell. I mean, they didn't even make the playoffs, but he did make the Lindros trade, which honestly you could argue that maybe in hindsight, as good as Lindros was, the fact they gave up so much and a future Hall of Famer in Peter Forsberg.
Yeah, Forsberg is the clincher there. Looking back and saying, could I have a do-over?
Right, but
at the time, Lindros was a generational talent, like Gretzky was before him, and then like Sidney Crosby is now, and then
Connor McDavid.
There's a guy out there that's coming into the league this year.
But Bedard, I was hoping the Flyers would stink enough to get him, but the Flyers are playing too good, which is a curse and a blessing.
They say that this guy
they're playing just good enough to miss out on this.
They say this guy's the next Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, but one move that Farwell did make that I think was a great move was he traded Ron Sutter and Murray Barron to the St. Louis Blues for Dan Quinn and Rod Brindamore. Brindamore had a long career here, and he was a big part of the Flyers franchise that had a lot of success with Lindros, LeClaire, Redberg, and those guys. So
very good player, very hot.
Yeah. So okay. So there are unsung guys here. How about if we do most? How about if we do most interesting GMs? The Phillies. I don't know if the Phillies. There's only a couple. I mean, do you really think Phillies? I can't really think of an interesting GM with the Phillies.
Like quirky or?
Well, I was going to say the most interesting GM that I could think of, and the most controversial is Sam Hinkie, the Sixers. I mean, anybody out there knows, Sam Hinkie. I mean, the league came in and banned the guy. You know what I'm saying? The league kicked him out. So Sam Hinkie was the Sixers GM. He was hired in 2013. He started the process, basically deliberately tanking for losses. Step one of the process was trading Drew Holiday, who was a young up-and-coming guard. He was the Sixers' only All-Star that year. and that started the process. He went out and got Nerlens Noel. He got a future first-round pick. Basically, Hinkie came in, started, losing on purpose, collecting assets, and the one thing about Hinkie was though he couldn't really draft well.
No, and he was an asset collector. Hey, I can't even imagine what this team would look like now if he had stayed as GM, because it was just fantasy league.
Yeah.
He would draft. They were losing on purpose, and he wasn't the only one or the first one to do that.
San Antonio did it when
Houston.
San Antonio did it when they knew Tim Duncan was coming out.
Right.
They
There
tanked.
was a couple teams. He took it to another level
Yeah.
because they
Houston
were just
did
out
it
now
with Samson, right?
broadcasting that.
Yeah.
This is how the league lets us do it, and this is how we're going to do it. But it seems like he was always acquiring people to unload for other. He was never, well, the key thing, I think one of the key things with him, he wanted, I think he came in originally with a 3-year contract, and he wanted a 9 or 10-year contract. And you just don't give an unproven anybody 9 to 10 years to get it together.
Well, the one thing I'll say, I mean, in Hinkie's defense, and maybe this is part of this is ownership, because he was given, what's the saying, carte blanche or whatever to make these moves. I mean, a lot of teams wouldn't have taken Joel Embiid with the foot injury that he had, and at least for all the ripping I could do on Hinkie, at least he did get us a superstar player. Because the purpose of the tank was to get he should have got more with all those assets.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he got one. Yeah, superstar.
And anybody, I mean, my son could have picked Joel Embiid if you took the injury out of it. But and another thing about Hinkie too, I think they want, they tanked for so long. But part of the reason though is Embiid wasn't supposed to miss 2 years. He was supposed to miss 1. He wound up re-injuring his foot. But getting Joel Okafor turned out to be a disaster. Michael Carter Williams was rookie of the year, but that was only because it was a bad team.
Exactly.
He actually made a good move trading Michael Carter Williams, because he wasn't that good.
No, he wasn't.
The player that they could have kept, again, hindsight is what it always is Drew Holiday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He would have been terrific to keep.
Oh yeah.
Right, but agreed. But the only problem is though, if they had Drew Holiday, they may not have lost enough to get that pick to get Joel Embiid. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so it was kind of a master plan. But I would say Hinkie was the most interesting. The other interesting would have to be Bobby Clark, and Bobby Clark simply because, for many reasons, but simply because of, I mean, he had, how many GMs have had a feud with their star player to the point where,
Name calling and
Eric Lindros sat out, right?
Their parents.
Exactly. I mean, Eric Lindros sat out for a whole year before he got traded, and Bobby Clark wouldn't even call him by his name. He would just be like, that player, I mean, so
Bobby Clark, I mean, you got to remember too, Bobby Clark was the star of Mr. Snyder's team.
Yeah.
And so I mean, it was so, the Flyers front office was so incestuous back then, because after Clark left, then it was Holmgren. And then after Holmgren, it was Hextall, right?
Yeah.
They also had Bill Barber.
Yeah, Barber.
Yeah, Barber's the coach.
They had all the old guys.
Craig Berube was a coach at one point.
Berube, yeah. I mean, they tried to bring the old.
Did you say Holmgren?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Holmgren was a GM. He was Clark's bodyguard when he played.
Yeah.
He became the enforcer, one of the enforcers after
he looked like it.
The Schultz and Kelly.
Yeah.
And Selesky and those guys left. Yeah.
So, all right. So, I mean, they're the, I mean, like I said, most interesting. I mean, they're the only two that are kind of like the controversial, interesting, I would say, category. So who would you guys say was the worst GM for the Phillies? If you had to pick a GM that was like the worst guy, who would you think was the worst?
Oh, Clintack.
Yeah, I agree.
That's recent history,
That's recent history, but I mean,
and
Yeah.
it's evident by getting Dombrowski in there.
and look what he's done. Yeah, I mean, Clintack, he's literally had to sweep the whole place
To me-
out.
to me,
Well, look at Clintack's drafts. They had the number 1 pick overall. Takes Mickey Moniak, bust. Then he has a top like 8 or 10 pick. Takes that other outfielder. You have it probably written down right
No,
now.
it was what Hanley was the name?
I can't remember his name. Shit. It was an outfielder, but yeah,
It was the 8th pick, and
he
yeah,
was so bad I can't even remember his name.
yeah. And,
He was right off the top of my tongue before.
They just
They just
released
traded him last
Hayes.
year.
Yeah.
Hazley.
That's it, Hazley.
Hazley, yeah.
Adam Hazley.
they just traded him.
Yeah, he was going through some mental issues, and probably what happened was, you think about it.
Think about it.
What
Yeah.
probably happened was they started messing with his swing, like they
with
did
this
with
analytics
Kingery.
crap.
With Clintack comes in and brings in the analytics, right? And next thing you know, you've got a guy like Kingery who he makes when he first came up, he passed the eye test. Guy could play ball. Then they started moving him around all these different positions.
Yeah.
Then they started messing with launch angle and this and that, and everything else. And I remember last year looking at Reading at the end of not Reading, Lehigh Valley. Was it Lehigh?
I don't even know where he was.
He was at Triple A. He was Lehigh Valley.
Wasn't he hitting like 198 or something?
He was hitting in like the end of August. He was hitting 202.
Wow.
Who's this?
Kingery.
Oh yeah.
And he's making what, 6-8 million a year.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth, because at least, you have to feel bad for a kid like that. But at least he got, I think he got a 5-year, $5 million per year. So he got about $20 to $25 million to, if he's smart, he doesn't have to, he can do whatever
Oh
he wants.
yeah. If he's smart, it doesn't matter if he hits 198. At least if he sets himself up, at least he could have a nice little cushion.
Boy,
But the guy grew up always wanting to be a Major League Baseball player, and here's a kid that had the talent, and they ruined him.
Yeah.
And that was Clintack and his people.
Yeah. Oh, and
And
he had every position in the field just about, and then his swing, like you said, they had him with the analytics. The thing is, though, if he had the talent, if he has the talent, somebody's going to reach it.
Yeah.
If you over adapted to what Clintack was trying to preach to him, you would think that if you have the talent, a different voice,
Can bring it out.
So
You have to hope.
maybe
with this
gets
new,
it, and
maybe with this new batting coach that we had that came in last year, that's had a lot of success with the guys. I forget his name. Is it Ryan? I forget. But anyway, another thing about Clintack, Roger and I were talking about this. One of our shows coming down the road is we're going to do the worst free agent signings in Philly sports history. And under Clintack, I mean, Woo's worse than Jake Arrieta.
oof.
20 million a year for 3 years. He goes out there and the balls hit all over the field, and he's out there in the papers
Flexing.
blaming all the guys in the field that they can't field.
You know what the sad thing is about Clintack, though? And I would say it's Jake Arrieta, but I can make an argument. You could also say Carlos Santana. So that goes to show you how bad he was, because Carlos Santana didn't do shit here either.
No.
He was good everywhere else but here.
Yeah.
So that's two bad ones. So Clintack.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I don't even believe they needed Santana at the time.
They didn't. They should have had Rhys Hoskins play first. They tried Rhys Hoskins play left field again, trying to have guys play different positions and outsmarting themselves, and they messed Rhys Hoskins up for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, when it comes to worst, I don't think that there's anybody worse than Clintack. He's 34. he came out of Cornell. He was 34. He was like this boy genius because he knew analytics and all this crap. Look what he did to this franchise. He set it back. Thankfully, we have a new administration now that's really turned the corner and got this thing moving.
Dombrowski to me is so similar to Pat Gillick.
Yeah.
He's a winner.
In their history,
Yeah.
I think he's a little bit younger than Pat
Yeah.
Gillick, but where they went,
They win.
they win.
You know what, the thing about guys like that, they what's the saying? There's an adult in the room.
Yeah.
There's an adult. When Dave Dombrowski walks in a room, you just go, okay, he's got it. You know, it's like an it factor kind of. Like Dave Dombrowski comes in, and you have this sense of calm about you, where you're like, okay, you know what? We have an adult that's running the Phillies, not some pencil pushing nerd. You know, we got a guy that knows baseball, that has success, that will make moves and find a way to get the team over the top. Like I'm more confident in the Phillies right now than I've ever been. Probably since Gillick, but maybe even more because, you know, this team has a payroll that's so high. I mean, this ownership is going out there getting guys like Trey Turner. They even signed some Japanese kid today or Korea. I don't know what, but Phillies never did that back in the day. I mean, they're getting talent from all over the world.
Sure.
You know. But anyway, I'm looking at the worst. When I look at the Sixers' worst GMs, I mean, I can come up with a lot, to be honest with you. But and it's sad to say, one of them might actually be Jimmy Lynam, who I loved as a coach. But when he was here as a GM, he was horrible. But I am going to say, I would say Brad Greenberg, but Brad Greenberg didn't make any moves. I'm going to say John Lucas was the worst GM we ever had.
And he was
John Lucas was 94 to 96. He came into a bad situation, made it worse, if it was even possible. I mean, the team was in shambles. I mean, you had Sean Bradley. This was Jimmy Lynam that took Sean Bradley second between Chris Webber and Anthony Hardaway, but I don't blame John Lucas for that. John Lucas comes in, takes Sharon. If loving you was wrong, I don't want to be right. Well, he was horrible.
It was
horrible. He had a decent rookie year. Then in 1995, now everybody and their mother wanted Jerry Stackhouse, but Kevin Garnett was taken after Jerry Stackhouse. Stackhouse didn't work here.
No.
Turned out to be horrible.
a long career, but
yeah, he had a nice career.
They kept the right guy.
Oh yeah,
who they drafted the following year, which was obviously.
Yeah, but John Lucas basically, the team was terrible. He traded Sean Bradley for Derek Coleman. It was a classic. Let me give you my trash for your trash. Derek Coleman was hurt a lot. He only played like 127 games in his first stint as a Sixer. So John Lucas is my worst Sixers GM by far. Who would you say was the worst Eagles GM?
Oh, Joe Kuharich. Joe Kuharich, without a doubt. Joe Kuharich was the GM from 64 to
70.
No, 64 to
72.
No, 68. 64, 65, 68.
That's what Jerry Wallman did.
Yeah.
Right.
Jerry Wallman was the owner. He gave Kuharich a 10-year contract, $1 million contract. Now at the time, Lombardi, who had already been to 3 or 4 championship games at this point in his career, was only making $60,000, and they were paying this guy Kuharich. Kuharich had coached. His history was he had played off. He was an offensive lineman in Notre Dame in the 40s. Then he went to the war. Then he came back. He coached a team, University of San Francisco, the Dons, and they were in 1951. I think they were one of the best teams in the country. And then after that, he went to the Redskins and coached for 4 years in the middle 50s. He had 1 winning season, and then he went to Notre Dame and coached there for at least 4 or 5 years. And at the time, he was the only coach in Notre Dame that ever had a losing record. He had one.
What a prick! I mean, this guy messed 2 of my teams up.
Of his,
you know,
of his, in his recruiting class, of all his recruiting classes, there was one guy who made the pros and was a decent player. He was drafted by the 49ers in the early 60s. His name escapes me now. I wrote an article about Q Herrick. It was published in a football magazine. And this guy was a real he was just terrible.
Joe must go.
Yeah, his win-loss record, 28 and 41, 28 wins, 41 losses, 1 tie. They had one winning season, and they got to back then. They were like 9-5, and they had something known as the playoff ball in the 60s, where the teams that did not make the championship game, the third and fourth place, would play each other. And the winner would get beat third place in the playoff ball. And Lombardi's quote on the playoff balls was, "The playoff ball is the shit ball. A loser's ball for losers."
It kind of is though.
Oh, it is. So anyway, he lost that game. But anyway,
it's like a wild card.
Yeah.
He had and his trades. He traded Hall of Fame Tommy McDonald, wide receiver Tommy McDonald, to the Cowboys for a kicker and 2 backups. Then he goes and then Sonny Jurgensen found out about this. Now, Sonny Jurgensen, one of the greatest, if not greatest passer of all time in the NFL, he complained to Woolman and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And Q Herrick said, "What are you doing? Why are you trading our best guy?" So he trades Sonny Jurgensen to Washington for Norm Snead. Norm Snead maybe had 1 or 2 decent seasons here, but he was no Sonny Jurgensen.
Yeah.
Then he had Pro Bowlers, Maxie Baughan and Irv Cross, and those guys were on the 1960 team, the championship team. And he traded them to the Rams for a couple backups. And he had one good draft pick. It was maybe around 65 or 66 or whatever. His name was Bob Brown. He eventually went to the Hall of Fame.
Oh, he played for the Raiders too,
He
right?
played for
Lineman.
yeah. But anyway, in like around 67 or 68, he didn't want to play for Q Herrick anymore. He hated it here. So Q Herrick traded him to the Rams for Irv, 69 it was, for Irv Cross, who had been traded earlier. Now, this was Irv Cross's last year. And the year after that was 1970. That's when CBS did their pregame show with Brent Musburger, Irv Cross,
Jimmy the
He was
Greek.
terrific.
Jimmy the Greek, and the girl that used to be, she was in Miss America.
Oh yeah, I knew you were talking about. I don't know her name. I was just a little kid, so I don't
I
remember.
can see her.
Yeah, well, I can see her
Wasn't
too.
it like Leslie? No, not Leslie Van.
But anyway, he traded it for Irv Cross, who played 1 year, and he was at the end of his career and in backups. So I mean, here's a guy that got rid of 1, 2, 3 Hall of Famers, and these guys were all Pro Bowlers when he traded them too, and 2 other Pro Bowlers. And all he got were backups and a kicker. So he made the worst trades. He didn't have any decent waiver wire acquisitions throughout his whole tenure. He only had 2 draft choices that really made any impact on the team, and that was later. One was a guy named Ben Hawkins. We talked about him, the Hawk, when we did the wide receivers. He was one of the original divas wide receivers in '66, and a guy by the name of Tim Rosevich.
He was the crazy guy, right?
He was an All-American defensive end from USC, but
He would eat glass.
he would eat glass.
Yeah.
He would light shit up on fire and swallow it. It was crazy. And they made him a middle linebacker. And they were the only 2 drafts of all the years that he had of guys that were any decent at all.
Yeah, till Jim Murray got in there, there was a void.
Yeah.
Because after Herrick, Pete Retzlaff was GM for a couple of years. I think 69 and 70.
Yeah, here you go. Pete was who your father knew very well, and you've met him obviously. He had 69 through 72. He had a win-loss record of 15, 37, and 4, and he had they hired Jerry Williams to take over for Q Herrick. He was from Canada. He coached here 3 years, and then they had Ed Kayak, who was on the championship team, 60 championship team. He coached in 71, 72. Nope, they didn't have no winning records.
Oh God, doormats.
69. This is their draft choices. 69. They were runner up because in 68,
OJ.
OJ came out.
Yeah, they won
Or
that last
69,
game.
They won that last game, so
The Houston Texans did.
they lost that. So they lost the chance to get Simpson. So they picked a guy named Leroy Keys, who was an All-American running back from Purdue, and he couldn't make it in the NFL. They tried him at running back, it didn't work. They tried to make him a defensive back,
Mhm.
it didn't work. He eventually only played here a few years, and then he became a minister somewhere in North Philadelphia.
Oh wow.
Yeah. But they did pick a guy named Bill Bradley, who was a 5-time Pro Bowler safety. He came out of Texas. He could punt. He could return punts. He was a good athlete. In 70, they picked a guy named Steve Zabel. He was an All-American tight end from Oklahoma. They made him an outside linebacker. He was a good player. In 71, they picked the first-round pick. They had an All-American guy they made. They picked Richard Harris. He was an All-American defensive end, but he was just a total bust. The only guy they got out of that draft was Harold Carmichael, 7th-round pick. And in 72, their first-round pick was a quarterback by the name of John Reeves. I made a note here to myself. He was the original David Carr. If you remember when David Carr was drafted by the Houston Texans, their first pick, they just threw him out there to the wolves. So that's what happened to Reeves, and they beat him to a pulp every week to the point where he just couldn't go out there and do it anymore. Same thing happened to Carr. The only really good draft they had that year was John Bunning, who was one of the guys that played on the Super Bowl team.
Right.
And that was it. And he made the two key trades was they traded Harold Jackson for Roman Gabriel. And then they in 71, the quarterback was Pete Lisk. They had drafted him earlier in the 60s, but he played in the AFL. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention, we're talking about GMs and Phillies.
Lee Thomas.
Lee Thomas. I mean, he had a checkered career, but you talk about missed opportunities. Lee Thomas in 1991, the Pirates offered Barry Bonds to the Phillies.
I never knew that.
I never knew that.
But Lee Thomas and Bill Giles did not want to trade Von Hayes. They wanted Von Hayes, and Von Hayes was traded. Von Hayes was ultimately traded like a year or two later.
The Angels for Kyle Abbott.
He got traded in 91. That same season, they traded him for Kyle Abbott and Ruben Amaro Jr. to the Angels.
Yeah.
Kyle Abbott was pitched one season here. He was 1-14.
I remember that.
And then in 93, we were offered Randy Johnson from the Mariners. But again, Thomas and Giles didn't want to make the trade because they didn't want to give up Mike Lieberthal.
Yeah,
I despised it.
Mike Lieberthal.
I remember that
two Hall of
because
Famers.
Well, can you imagine if they had Randy Johnson and Kurt Schilling on that 93 playoff staff? They would have won.
Oh, they would have won. They wouldn't have lost that.
So, all right, well, we're going to get ready to wrap up in a little bit here. I just want to get my worst Flyers GM is the guy that's going right now, Chuck Fletcher. And some of it, I will say, some of it's been a little bad luck. I mean, Chuck Fletcher went out there. He got Ryan Ellis, defenseman from Nashville. He's the Flyers version of Jeff Ruland. Ryan Ellis only played 4 games. Jeff Ruland played 5. Basically every move that Fletcher has done has many of his moves haven't panned out. I mean, the Ryan Ellis trade, he went out and got, the trade for Giroux. I mean, the jury's still out on that. But a lot of people weren't in love with that return. And some of the contracts that he signed, like Kevin Hayes, 7 years, $50 million. I mean, for the first few years, it looked okay, but and Kevin Hayes having to bounce back now. But Chuck Fletcher, I mean, the jury's still out on him, but the Flyers as far as bad GMs, I'd have to say it's him right now because the franchise is in a really dark place. I mean,
Oh, it's a horrible place.
they are playing well recently. Tortorella has the guys playing hard, but they lack top end talent, and that's why I was hoping they would tank this year. I was literally hoping they would tank to get some top end talent.
Season's still young.
Yeah.
True, yeah, but I look though. Right now they would have the 9th pick in the draft, and you know I think they're like 7 or 8 points ahead of like the 4th, 5th pick. You know what I mean, something like that. So, but yeah, he's my worst Flyers GM, and but he's still here, so he still has time to rectify the situation or make it worse.
Yeah.
My money is on him making it worse, but
I
we'll
agree.
see.
Yeah.
The experience they have a couple or two or three 10-game losing streaks.
Yeah.
So, and I hope that they continue to develop.
Mhm.
I'm sure it'd be nice to have winning hockey in this town again.
You've got the potential to get your wish with
Well,
moving up in the draft.
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, honestly though, I'm kind of encouraged because the young guys are. I mean, at this point, the dream to get Bedard is like such a long shot. I mean, they'd have like a 1% chance in the lottery or something like that, or maybe 2%, whatever. So that dream's pretty much gone. So at this point, I'm hoping guys like this Owen Tippett develop and some of these younger guys can get better and show some progress. And I do think they have a good coach. That's one thing. I'll give Fletcher some credit in time and Tortorella because I think they got the coach right, and hopefully the culture's changing. And because like you said, man, I mean, I would love to get back to winning hockey. I mean, when I first started watching sports, the Flyers were one of the hottest teams in the city. I mean, you took me to my first game. It was 1987. It was a bench clearing brawl. It was great. I mean, I was like, man, this hockey stuff's awesome. You know what I mean?
We were fourth row from the ice.
It was awesome.
We were right by
When
the
was the
penalty
last time
box.
you saw a bench clearing brawl?
Then, honestly, well, that was the only one I was ever at.
Mhm.
I'm
Hockey
44.
is
I was
actually
8 years
unlike,
old.
Unlike baseball.
I was my son's age. I was a little younger than Joey. Joey's about to be 9 next month. This was January '87. I wasn't turning 9 until that July.
Yeah.
So I was younger than the little guy, But hopefully
Cool.
hopefully things change. But anyway, I mean, hey, listen, there's so much info. I mean, we could sit here all night with all this info, but I think we, hope everybody liked the show out there. We kind of narrowed it down. We wanted to get the best ones, the most, we wanted to get the influential ones, the best ones, the worst ones, the interesting ones. Hopefully, there's been a rich history and some good things are going on, and hopefully the future brings more better things,
Sure. Especially, you have to feel very optimistic about the Phillies, the way the direction of the franchise is going.
Right, and that comes right back to
And the Flyers,
two
and
people,
the Eagles,
Middleton and Dombrowski.
Yeah, and the Eagles.
With
The one, Flyers are where they are, but the one that have the Morey is, I don't know what Morey is.
I can't read him yet.
Yeah, I can't understand.
I think I think a lot of the Sixers is going to come down to who they add at the trade deadline, and if the big guy's healthy, they could big guy healthy, Harden healthy, maybe Harris. Maybe they add another bench piece. This team could beat anybody, but they also might not get out of the second round. I mean, I don't know. They haven't had a chance to gel together. I mean, they've had somebody hurt the whole time.
Yeah, they haven't played too many games together.
That includes this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think going into last night, I think they had 15 different starting lineups.
Yeah.
Something approaching. It wasn't 15; it was 12 to 13.
Yeah.
And we all know you need continuity, and in order to have continuity, you got to have same guys out there before you can develop and judge the team.
Yeah, PJ Tucker looks cooked right now. The best acquisition by far was DeAnthony Melton. DeAnthony Melton can play some basketball. So we'll see what happens. But
yeah, I mean, Tucker, they're playing him too many minutes.
they got him for the playoffs, So we'll see what happens in the playoffs. But we're going to get ready to wrap up. Before we do, I want to get before we do, let's give a shout out to our sponsors. First off, we got Sherry's Tickets. Anybody out there that wants to go to a sporting event or a concert, possibly the theater. This place is family owned and operated since 1946. You can save 10% off with the promo code EOP10. Go to www.sherrystickets.com. So give them some love. Anybody out there with some legal problems, workers' compensation, motor vehicle accidents, personal injury, or criminal law, call my man David R. Cherry Esquire at 610-565-0300 or go on www.cherryinjurylaw.com. So make sure you give him a shout. I guess it's one of those things where hopefully you don't have to give him a shout, but if you do, make sure you hit him up. Dolan's is a good bar down Delaware County. A lot of the guys from EOP live down there, and they got $8 cheesesteaks. They have a wing cheesesteak that my man Mike Lauro swears by. He says it's phenomenal. So, anybody out there wants to eat some food, it might be worth the drive, or I know it's worth the drive, I should say. Phillies road trips here. Philly Sports has a lot of great road trips. This is the Eagles game, the Eagles trips this year, but they have a trip going to Brooklyn for Sixers Nets, and they also have a Phillies trip, I believe, going to Pittsburgh. They also have a Phillies trip going to the Yankee Stadium. So all that sounds pretty cool. Next week, we got Eagles playoffs, and Edge of Philly Sports and the Painted Lines do pre-game, halftime, and post-game shows. So make sure you check them out, www.eopsports.com, and get the breakdown. Here's the Edge of Philly lineup right here. So make sure you check out all the shows. There's something for everybody. And I'll be back on Monday night with the Sully Squad. We'll be doing a Eagles playoff preview, and we'll be breaking down all of the weekend's games. I'll be cheering hard for the Seattle Seahawks, even though I think they're going to get their what's blown in. But I would love to play Seattle the first game.
So would everybody.
Yeah, I think everybody would, right?
Yeah.
Or a Captain Obvious there. And honestly, as much as I hate the Giants, I wouldn't mind playing the Giants. I mean, I can't really root for the Giants because I hate them. But I'll take the Giants right now. Bring the Giants to Lincoln Financial Field. I would take that right now. I don't know how you guys feel, but that's who I want to play. I'd rather play the Giants than either Dallas or Tampa Bay. Well, Tampa Bay has a bad year, but it's still Tom Brady.
True.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's the wild card.
Let him go undefeated against Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before he plays us.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I saw, Dallas has 4 losses this year. The 4 or 5? Maybe they lost. Well, whatever it was, they have 4 losses on. Yeah, I think they had 5 because they lost Sunday. Yeah, that's what it is. They have 5 because they lost the first game at home. Other than Tampa Bay at home, their other 4 losses are all on natural turf, all on grass. Because apparently grass slows down their defensive pass rush, slows down their speed a little bit.
Yes.
So, but anyway, all right, we're going to wrap up here. Any final thoughts or anything?
Go Birds.
Yeah, go Birds.
Go Birds. And
we'll
we'll be back in a few weeks,
We'll
right?
be back in a couple of weeks. We don't know what our topic's going to be. It could possibly be worst free agent signings in Philly sports. We may feature. We may do a whole show on one of these GMs and their whole administration, looking at the team record, the team players, and everything.
Okay.
So I mean, it's Buddy Ryan's Eagles. We have a whole host of things that we can talk about.
Cool. Well, anyway, have a great week. Enjoy the football. Go Seahawks. Let's go. I want to play you next week.